Chris and I were deciding this morning who was going to step up and introduce all these things, and I said, we'll play it by ear. And he said, fine. I like being able to work with somebody like that, and the fact is that he's willing to step up here. Chris has come a long way, and you know from your experience around here that we have a tremendous number of good, qualified people as leaders, both men and women, but to be a deacon is something special. The fact is, although it's not one of the requirements that we'll be talking about this morning, it's unusual. As I was thinking about it, this will be the third Chris that we have as a deacon here, so it could be a bit confusing, but we're sure we can count on any one of these Chris's to do an effective job. I'm glad that Chris is willing to step up here and share some things as we stand together and talk about the value of being good leaders. Chris?
Put in for 10 seconds since it's already a little bit more intense than a Wednesday night debrief. This is pretty much my first time ever doing anything of this nature, so we'll try not to do too much of a death by PowerPoint. But with that said, one other thing I just want to say real quick before we get into this. We've been coming here for, I guess, 2.5, 3 years now. So this is the first time I've had a chance to do this. So, in the words of David Schonhoff, good morning. And also, it's just an honor to be up here and stand in front of you all, and for the elders to select me, to nominate me. It's a great honor, and I consider that a privilege. So getting right into our PowerPoint, David and I spent several days getting this together over the last few weeks. So my challenge today for myself, for the rest of the ministers here, the rest of the deacons, elders, all the membership, teachers, I'm going to cover a few points that I felt like that I'm going through myself so I can relate. Test and prove yourself. Continue to improve and challenge yourself and improve as a team. Talking about what Dennis had already said, we pretty much knew that going into this, basically step one was going to be some verses out of 1 Timothy. So if you'll go to 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 8 through 13. And this is basically kind of our highlight for what we're looking at. I'm pretty sure David's going to be hitting a lot of this later, so I don't want to steal his thunder. But these verses are going to deal with what y'all are looking at me at for the next few weeks. We're all familiar with these verses. I don't want to bore you to death by reading everything that I have, but these are pretty important. So starting with verse 8, likewise, deacons must be reverent, not double-tongued, not given to too much wine, not greedy for money, holding the mystery of the faith with a pure conscience. But let these also first be tested. Then let them serve as deacons, being found blameless. Likewise, their wives must be reverent, not slanderers, temperate, faithful in all things. Let deacons be the husbands for one wife, ruling their children and their own house as well. For those who serve well, as deacons obtain themselves a good standing and great boldness in the faith which is Jesus Christ. Talking about, like I said, my big points are testing and proving yourself. And the verse that really jumped out to me there was verse 10, that let those also first be tested. I feel like since I've been coming here, me and Vanessa and Gavin, since day one, it's been a test. Little things here and there, meeting with David weekly there for a long time, wanting to improve myself, my family. So little tests, little things here, being asked to do things here, do this, do that, can you help with this? You know, it's a test. And I feel like each one of us, you know, we need to give 100%. That's what God deserves, is 100% from all of us. Looking a little bit more into verse 10, you know, talking about test, you know, and you see what we're hitting on with some of our highlights up on the screen. Verse 10, basically meaning that deacons are to be evaluated, observed, and then approved before getting appointed to the office of deacon. I feel like that's pretty much where I'm at this point. With you all's agreement, in a couple of weeks, we'll take that one step further. Another thing that's really important there talks about your character. During this whole process of going, you know, kind of being in limbo for the next couple of weeks as I am, wanting to be a deacon for you all. But it's just that my character won't stop there. You know, this is a process before and after whatever happens. You know, I'm to be blameless and without accusation. So hopefully I have been that to you all. I'll continue to do that. Character is a big thing. I like to consider that I'm a pretty good guy, and I hope y'all do too. Continue with testing and proving yourselves, myself, and everybody. It's not an easy road. As many of you all know, I'm a fairly new Christian. Me and Vanessa were baptized just a couple of years ago. But a lot of y'all have been Christians a lot longer. And it's never an easy road. It's always tough. Even going through the Bible, you know, multiple times it is mentioned that Christians, church leaders will be tested over and over and over. With that being said, you know, 2 Corinthians 13:5, you'll turn there with me real quick. The longer I stumble with the pages, the longer I forget this to last. So again, that's going to be 2 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 5. Examine yourselves as to whether you are in the faith. Test yourselves. Do you not know yourselves that Jesus Christ is in you, unless indeed you are disqualified? But I trust that you know that we are not disqualified. In Paul's second letter here to the Corinthian church, kind of get a little bit more context, you know, he's either written to them or been there and talked to them because he sees how that church is struggling. This verse speaks to me in a slightly different way, personally, individually. You know, he's what I getting at him. You know, he's telling me, slow down. Think before you speak. Think before you lead. Really consider what's going on. You know, re-examine yourself and make sure that you're doing not so much what's right for you, but what is right for God. Put yourselves in check. It's human nature not to want to do that, to admit that you're wrong, or maybe you did something that wasn't exactly nice, or somebody else was fond of, you know, a day or two, or weeks, or years ago before. Think about that seriously, because, you know, it matters a lot to everybody else. I think I'm looking at the right slide. Yes. Don't just talk the talk, but walk the walk. A lot of us hear that a few times a week, months. I hear it a lot at work. Being responsible for pretty much every citizen here in Hamilton County at the 911 center. We have to be on our A game all the time. We can't just talk about it, we have to do it. The leadership here at this church, they don't just walk, they don't just talk, they walk it. Every leader in this church, deacons, elders, teachers, ministers, everybody, they got their A game. Talking about walk the walk, Romans chapter 12, verses 1 through 8. These are pretty powerful verses. I'm not going to read every verse to you. Like I said, I don't want this to be more of a death by PowerPoint. I want to try to get a little something out of it from what I understand and the way I take it. Verse 1, the way I interpret it, the way I hope you interpret it as well, it's using our bodies to serve and obey God. It's pretty simple. I don't think that verse really says anything else. Looking at verse 2, instead of being molded by the values of this world, let God's truth guide and share our thoughts and behaviors. We do that well here at Central. One of the biggest things I get out of these 8 verses here, verse 3, self-observation. Like I said earlier, putting ourselves in check, really examining what we do, what you do, what I do, on a day in, day out basis. It's not just what we do here, but how we conduct our lives outside of here. It also says a lot how we reflect on the church. Verses 4 and 5, functioning body of the church of Christ is the headship. Verse 6, God-given abilities that need and should be used to encourage other church members and other people in general. And then lastly, verses 7 and 8. I think that in my version it says ministries. And that's not so much just the speaking part of what David, Craig, and Chris Miller do on a weekly basis here. But it's our service. It's what we do, how we do it, and functioning with the church. So that's my 2 big points there, is the self-observation and our service, and what I would like for my service to be here with you all. Continuing with the topic of improving and challenging others, 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 58, talking about be steadfast. It's a pretty powerful word to be using in front of the way it's used there in that verse. So let me find it real quick. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. Steadfast isn't exactly a word that we use in today's common language anymore. But the words that I could think of for that meaning that everybody can understand, the way I look at it, to be unwavering, loyal, faithful, devoted, solid, dedicated. I think each one of those words, again, like I said a minute ago, describes the leadership of the Central Church. I can't think of any other words to use that could more perfectly describe everybody that has some type of position here at this church. Another verse that come to mind when I was kind of digging through, trying to find things that talk about improving and challenging others and challenging myself. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 8. Again, 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 8. Now he who plants and he who waters are one, and each one will receive his own reward according to his own labor. It's on us to do our jobs. It's our responsibility. It's no one else's. We can't blame somebody else for something. And don't worry about what you're getting rewarded for. It's not the results that we're looking for or that God's looking for. It's the effort and the quality of work that you put into it. God expects and deserves 100% of our effort all the time. No ifs, ands, or buts. That's a pretty plain statement. The quality of the work that we look to do, it has to be very beneficial, and it can't be, as looking back through the Bible, you hear it many times, false teachings. That's not what we're about. Biblically scriptural, all the time. I know David likes it when I throw in a few work examples in the number one center. So, continuing to improve, challenge others, challenge ourselves. Every call that we take at the 911 center, every 911 call, we take about 2,000 a day. Every one of those calls gets graded, just like we're back in school. We get graded on those calls. We get knocked points off for certain things, and we get those results back. That way you can monitor what you're doing wrong as far as what you need to improve, quicker information given. We take one-year evaluations to see how we need to improve, just like here at the church. If anybody sees anything being done wrong, or even good, let those people know. That way they can continue to do what's good. Or if something needs to be slightly adjusted. It's just like any other type of leaders. If they don't know they're doing something wrong and you may not agree with, go to them and let them know. Let's talk about it so we can fix it. Promise I'm almost done. Improving as a team. We've got a great team, as I've said here before already several times. We have a great team that's unified and that wants to be one body with Christ. 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 12 through 31. Those verses basically talk about those two things, unity and one body. Starting in verse 25, Paul kind of gets real with some of these people that he's speaking to. And he kind of has the parent-to-child moment, sit down for a minute, listen to what I've got to say, because this is the real deal. He's talking about worry more about the whole, not your individuals, not yourself. Let's concentrate on the whole picture. There was a word, I believe it's in verse 25. Vanessa helped me look it up. I believe it was last night or the night before. Pronounced as schism. It's a split or division between strongly opposed sections or parties caused by differences in opinion or belief. That can destroy a church in a matter of days, weeks, months. I greatly hope that I never see that happen in this church. Since day one we started coming here, y'all have made us feel like a family. You don't get that everywhere you go. I know we've heard multiple speakers over the last several weeks talk about how awesome Central is, but welcoming people and making them feel like they're part of the family. We need to continue that and make that a top-notch goal. Paul's also saying that no member is more or less important, and no task is more or less important. So get this individual stuff out of your head. It's not about me. It's not about how I do it. Let's do it together. Let's do it as a team and get it accomplished. Everybody knows 1 Corinthians 13:11. I believe this is kind of a good verse to kind of finish on. Paul kind of hammers it home. And I will read that to you as soon as I find it. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. No foolishness, no childish behaviors. I believe we pretty much encompass that here at Central. Nobody's looking to, put the crown on their head, take all the glory, so to speak. And we need to continue with that motto and continue with those type of words so we can be a stronger team and a stronger family. One last work example, pretty recent. I won't get into all the gory details. Several weeks ago, I took a phone call from a young girl, probably 15, 16 years of age, talking about how her friend was reported missing several weeks ago. This call that I got from her was the end of March, so roughly around the first part of March, she has a friend that goes missing, vanished through the night. Come to find out, shorten the story, she had snuck out. Wanted to go party with some friends, so they meet up in a car, they drive out to Cleveland. I do what most teenagers do. I'm sure there was drinking and narcotics involved. The friend that helped her sneak out goes back to pick her up the next morning at the hotel. She is not there. Nowhere to be found. At that point, her guardians, the friend goes to her guardians, I can't remember if it's her mom, dad, grandparents, let them know what had happened. They call the sheriff's department. They come out and file a missing persons report. They track down several leads. It goes nowhere. Well, this night that I'm talking to her friend, she's actually in connection with her at the second that I'm talking to her via text. Telling her about where she thinks she is. She's near a Motel 6, or what she thought was a Motel 6. The only thing she knew was that she was in Colquitt, Georgia. After doing about 45 minutes of research, there's Colquitt City, Georgia, and Colquitt County, Georgia. She was in Colquitt City. That's near the Florida-Georgia line. So with teamwork from my co-workers, my supervision, road sergeants from patrol, we call this little town in Colquitt City, Georgia. They got one officer on duty. It's probably about the size of Pottville or Dunlap. Telling this officer all their information. Here's what we got, here's what we think. We've got a random address that we were able to narrow down. So the officer goes, I'm familiar with that. It's a trailer park. We got some problems. So officer goes there. Juvenile was there the day before. So I started asking the officer about this hotel that I kept seeing on Google Maps. He goes, I'll check it out. I said, because when she was texting her friend, she kept saying something about a hotel. Shortening the story, the officer gets there, finds the 15-year-old missing juvenile. I don't know about y'all. When I was 15, I wasn't thinking about going 400 miles out of the way from my mom and dad's house because I knew the return would not be free. She had been held hostage against her will. She required immediate medical attention. The guy that was holding her had previous human trafficking charges. Who knows where this girl was about to go or where she was going to end up. But because of valiant teamwork, we were able to get her back home. That's the kind of teamwork I'm looking for. So,
Again, 1 Timothy chapter 3. We'll be looking at verses 8 to 13 for just a couple of minutes here. As Chris was saying here, I value our teamwork. The things that we do here at Central. We have some good leadership here, good eldership, deacons that are working hard, wives that support them, men and women in the congregation, young people alike, college students all together, working as a team. It's so important for us to understand what God is up to in this whole process. But specifically, when God designs leadership for the church, as you look at 1 Timothy chapter 3, he's giving us some requisites that are not just important or valuable, but they're direct commands from God. He talks in verses 1 through 7 about a group of people called elders. We see that term misused today in some religious circles. When you identify the concept of elder, the way God describes it here, it's a man that has risen up through the ranks for a long period of time with a lot of experience and age before he can even fit these qualifications. Deacons coming along have another category, yet a very important office within the church. As we've already talked about here, the details here, there's some personal behavior and there are some negative things mentioned and some positive things mentioned, and there are some family-related details that are qualifications for deacons. We can't just choose whoever we like and say, I'm going to call this person a deacon, until he or that person meets those qualifications. And so God has laid these things out for us as a church to examine those things. Sometimes we forget about, in our Christian life, the fact that God has some directions on some things. Very specifically, however, in church leadership. So the deacon qualifications on the personal behavior, starting with the negative mentioned in verse 8. Chris read them. I want to go back through them. It says, not double-tongued, not much wine, and not greedy. That concept of double-tongued doesn't just mean that he always tells the truth. That's true. That's important. That's a qualification, really, for any Christian as far as that goes. The fact is that when he says he's going to do something, that he fulfills that. He demonstrates a responsibility. He doesn't have to backpedal and say, well, I thought I did, and come up with excuses. It means he's a responsible individual, that what he says he's going to do is what he's going to do. When he says things, that's the way it is. It doesn't mean that he's a perfect individual, but he's not double-tongued. Not much wine. Now, back in the Bible times, I'm going to just point out something here. The idea of wine back then is a lot different than what we see on the shelves today in our different stores around here, that have the alcoholic content actually put into it. In the Bible times, when they put wine together, it was grape juice. Eventually, it would tend to ferment after kept for a while, but not nearly the alcoholic content that you see available today. God didn't intend for any of his people to be drinking wine, alcoholic content beverages, in any which direction on a regular basis. If you go back to the book of Solomon wrote in Proverbs, it talks about being careful to not even look at wine when it's bubbling over or whatever with that kind of content. And so the reference there doesn't fit exactly the same today. Abstinence is not a direct command, but it is something to consider as you think of a deacon, a person that really does not involve with alcoholic beverages. Again, not greedy. In any circumstance, when someone's in charge of certain things, there's a temptation for some people to take advantage of that opportunities. And so some of these things are laid out for us to understand. These are qualifications that we're looking at. On the personal behavior, the positive side, there's three things here mentioned in verses 8, 9, and 10. First one being reverent, described there. That's how he looks at God, the respectability that he demonstrates toward God and his word for that. The action that comes from within on the heart. Verse 9, holding the mystery of faith. The individual looks at what God says in his word, and he believes it and he follows it. He's holding on to the principles that are described by God. And then, as Chris covered very thoroughly, the idea that he's first tested. I think it's interesting that the very last comment that he makes about these personal behavior things is actually the first thing we need to look at, that they're tested to start with, and then after they meet that, then they can serve as a deacon. There are some family-related items within that in verses 11 and 12. It says, likewise their wives must be reverent, not slanderers, temperate, faithful in all things. The husband of one wife is being described here. Now, if you look at that, we understand very quickly, in other words, that has to be a male. It's not to put down women. I know some very strong spiritual women, leaders in their own right, but that can't qualify a woman as a deacon because she can't be the husband of one wife, not by biblical standards. Married, therefore, is a requirement because he has to be the husband of one wife. And of one person. I know of it back in those days and in some countries even today. There are men that can have several women as their wives. That doesn't meet the biblical qualification. There are some that have been married and divorced, etc., and that doesn't meet with it. Rather, this is a person that settles down in marriage and he understands the struggles it is in relationships. He manages through that. He does a good job with it. And he marries the type of person that's described in here as far as the women are concerned of being reverent, slanderers, and not slanderers, rather, and temperate, faithful in all things. So there are several items describing the woman of the husband, the woman of the deacon, to be described here as characteristics that are important. It's family related. In verse 12, then it talks about deacons being the husbands of one wife, ruling their children and their own houses as well. There's a slight difference between what are in elders' requirements and what are deacons' requirements. When you look back at verses 1 through 7, you'll see that the elders, not only to be a little bit more in age just by the very term, but their children are believing children. They've grown up within the faith and they've been tested and demonstrate that they have grown up enough to have chosen Christianity. Here, the deacon's child is just that he's ruling his children. He may have younger children, but they're obedient to him. They're respectful in all ways. And so he has children and they demonstrate a godly behavior. When we look at what God chooses for his leaders just across the board, Old Testament, New Testament, we see very quickly that God has always had a concern for who leads his people. You look at the Old Testament, you see characters like Moses that's chosen. In his younger years, when you look at the book of Exodus, there's a Moses that's 40 years old that probably could have fit as far as deacon age is concerned, and yet God doesn't choose him to be the leader yet, not for another 40 years, because he has a specific thing he has in mind for God. But he's concerned about the quality that's within Moses and not just his strong natural ability. Quality leaders. Different than educated, different than maybe being the CEO of a business. Now we're looking at something from a different angle. I want you to turn to 1 Samuel, Old Testament, in chapter 16, and we're going to look at a verse where God is choosing, through the work of Samuel, a leader for his nation. Now, previous to this, in chapters 15 and 14, etc., God had a leader for his people. His name was Saul, and Saul was a powerful leader and a good man to start with. But he did some things that were dishonoring God in a couple different ways. We don't have time to go through all that, but the detail is that they chose to not do what God said. And so Saul is going to be replaced. Now this prophet Samuel, he has a job specific, and that is, he is to anoint the kings as they come along. And so when Samuel is sent out once again to anoint the next king, he's a bit nervous about this. And the reason is because Saul is not the type of person that he ought to be in his kingship. And he knows, Samuel does, that if Saul finds out that Samuel's out anointing a king in another place and Saul is not in agreement with it, it could cost Samuel his life. But Samuel, nonetheless, is sent by God to the house of Jesse to pick out the new king. And so he's coming. In verse 5, it says, I come in peace to sacrifice to the Lord. And he goes to this community. And then in verse 6, he comes down to the house of Eliab. And he says, to this area, and he's choosing now a new king. Verse 6, I want you to notice this. So it was that when they came down, he looked at Eliab. This is one of David's brothers. This is one of the 7 sons of Jesse. And he looks at the individual and he thinks, this is the replacement. I want you to notice that it says he looked at him. All he saw was his physical characteristics, thinking what it takes to be a king. A leader of God's army, particularly. And he says to himself, surely the Lord's anointed is before me. But the Lord says to Samuel, verse 7, do not look at his appearance or at his physical stature, because I've refused him. I may have been a good man, he just wasn't God's chosen person. And then God says why. For the Lord does not see as a man sees. For the man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at his heart. Now, if you look around at the individuals that God chose, the 12 men that were to be apostles for Jesus, you're looking at individuals that might not fit leadership characteristics as far as a country is concerned. They're not educated. They're not of a certain quality or stature to be speakers in certain places or to run a country the way that a country thinks it ought to be. But when God is picking men out, like in the case of the 12 apostles, Jesus is looking at their hearts. So he chooses fishermen of all things. He chooses a guy that keeps the gate and charges taxes. And he chooses a variety of different people that are going to pull together as a team because God is looking at the heart. And this is what we do when we examine it. If you'll notice the qualifications in 1 Timothy, that God is not looking at how much money, how educated, how good looking, how he dresses. There's nothing set out there, how strong. He could be in a wheelchair. But the direction is not how much he can get up and do as much as where his heart is. You see. Now, not only for deacons and elders, but when God is looking for his people to represent him, and this is what we do as Christians. He's looking at our hearts. And he's examining what type of people we are. So when we choose leaders, we look at what God says in the requirements, like in 1 Timothy chapter 3. Titus chapter 2 also covers some of the characteristics about elders. But in addition to that, God says, I want you to look at the heart of the person. I want you to see where he's at. And these are things that we all ought to be aspiring for as far as pleasing God. So where's your heart as we think about ourselves as individuals? And we stop talking about deacons for just a moment, and we talk us, and we talk about what God's after and who we are. Because in a very real way, we represent God in this world out there. We are leaders for Him. We are ambassadors, as Paul describes it in one of his letters, for Christ. And how's your heart? And how do you represent it? Do people look at you and see quality, direction, faithfulness, steadfastness? And see, we prove ourselves daily by our actions, by our words, by our dress, who we are and what we represent. I represent Jesus. I want to do a better job at it. I think it's also very interesting that when Samuel is anointing later in this passage this young man David, and he's thinking to himself, boy, this is sure a young fellow. He has no idea what David's going to be able to do. Nor does he have an idea about some of the bad things that David will do. You know the whole story, possibly, and you know the things about him. And yet God makes out of him, because of his heart, what he needs him to be. He does the same for us. Do you have a heart for God? Are you a Christian this morning? And as we think about who we are and what we're doing, are you serving Him the way you ought to be? We close the lesson with an invitation to anyone to become a Christian, to come back to the Lord. If you've gone away, if your heart isn't right, get right today. And if you need to come forward, we sing a song. We're going to stand and sing it, and as we do, think about who you are, and if you need Christ, then come down front while we sing. Please stand.
Number 368 in your hymnals. Oh, to Jesus I surrender, all to Him I freely give. I will ever love and trust Him in His presence daily near. I surrender all.
Say welcome to all of our guests this morning, especially those families here with our graduates. I appreciate you being here. Ask that you fill out an attendance card, and we'll take those up during the last song and ask our members to do the same. Activities tonight during the 6 p.m. services, teen time. It says meet in the teen classroom and bring snacks. Also, we got a note here that Lost and Found. The shelves that we just bought for Lost and Found items, they're already full. Says if you have an item on the shelf, please pick it up. All items not collected by May 14th will go upstairs to the giveaway, which brings me to the fact that we found a set of car keys in the ladies' bathroom. So we have till the 14th